Hi folks, James here, and welcome to the Spiro Circle. This week I listened to a podcast hosted by Ryan Holiday and his guest Rutger Bregman. Now, they spoke about moral ambition, which is actually the title of Rutger's third book. I've read his other two, Humankind and Utopia for Realists. I would strongly recommend them. Anyway, they were talking about moral ambition and what it means to be a good person in the world. Now, you can strive to be a successful person or a powerful person. You can rise and become the CEO of a company, or you can be a big family man, or you can be a world leader. But if you don't have the values in you to make the world better, are you really considered a success? So we can all strive to be world leaders, but if we are corrupt leaders or if we do a bad job, then are we actually succeeding? It was a very interesting conversation, and I really recommend you check out that episode if that's something that would interest you. Anyway, something like that got me thinking about my next guest and the conversation that we had earlier this week. His name is Josh Dorfman, and he's the creator of The Lazy Environmentalist, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Planted. So what he basically does is he helps us all live more environmentally friendly lives without sacrificing our comfort or sacrificing our lifestyle. So he describes himself as a climate entrepreneur, and we had a very interesting conversation about technology, about societal shifts, about his journey, and it just got me thinking about all these different ideas this week that I've been absorbing about what it means to be a good person and what it means to be kind of a moral person and what that may look like. Because I speak to many entrepreneurs and I speak to many investors, and I don't really only some of the times do I really hear about how the world is getting better from their tech, not just more efficient and not just them getting richer or more powerful. So I had a really interesting conversation with Josh. It tied into the other podcast that I listened to with Ryan Holiday and Rutger Bregman. And yeah, this is just some of the ideas that have been on my mind this week. So I hope you enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, enjoy. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
I wanted to learn a bit more, please, about what you do and some of your journey that's taken you from where you started to where you are today. You describe yourself as a climate entrepreneur. What does that mean, and how does it differ from traditional entrepreneurship?
Probably the best way to say that most succinctly, the for me, the my environmental or climate epiphany, if you will, came 30 years ago, living in China in 1995. At the time, I was the China business manager for Kryptonite Bike Locks. So traveling around a country where a billion people are riding bikes and opening factories to make bicycle locks and thinking, wow, this is actually a great business idea. I'm probably going to be retired and living a very cushy life by the time I'm like 26, 27 years old. I mean, I was a young kid kind of traveling around the country. We opened a third factory outside of Guangzhou in 1997, and the owner of that factory, we were traveling together to this restaurant to celebrate and consummate the deal. We're in his Mercedes. We get to the parking lot, and he says, "Josh, look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes of all the Mercedes in this parking lot," right? And I thought, okay, you guys are just like us. You want more, bigger, and there's a billion people here. Yes, everybody rides a bicycle, but it's pretty clear everybody actually wants a car. And you could see the tunnels and highways and bridges and infrastructure being built so quickly. So I thought, I don't know anything about global warming or climate change, but how is the planet going to handle another billion cars on the planet, plus India, plus Eastern Europe, plus everywhere else developing? And that never left me. And so eventually I started to think, okay, where's all the oil come from? How does this work? What does this mean geopolitically? And it really turned me on to climate thinking, from that time, even in the 1990s, all the way through to today, thinking, how do we enable nations, communities, humans to live as well as they possibly can, raise their standards of living, which they are going to do and attempt to do in ways that enable future generations to do the same, right? That's kind of my definition of sustainability and climate. The last thing I would say is, I've worked on a bunch of ventures for 2 decades around this concept. 4 years ago, I started a company specifically designed to pull carbon from the atmosphere. So this was very much this climate venture, but not do it as a carbon offsets project, some sort of hope or wish and prayer that someone's going to pay us for, just taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but building a business around it. So we built this company called Planted that makes carbon negative building materials. We actually grow this very fast growing grass, grows 10 times faster than trees. We turn that grass, right? Because trees, like in grass, they'll absorb carbon as they grow. We turn that grass through into structural building materials for homes through a first of its kind factory that has no smokestack on the roof, so we don't give the carbon back. It is a straight up climate tech venture that is now scaling, and that's really shifted kind of how I look at the world in terms of business opportunities to cut carbon, grow profitable businesses, help companies build profitable businesses, and really in the process enhance our standards of living and quality of life as well.
Wow, it's amazing. Thank you for the overview. I want to kind of, if I may, take you back to 1995 and some of the sentiments that you just described about climate and sustainability, and then bring it forward to today. So, what are some of the cultural or societal changes, whether it's helping or hindering the work you do? What are some of the changes that you've seen just in terms of sentiment?
The changes in sentiment, I think, are around the understanding that, especially around clean energy, but not just clean energy, but especially around clean energy, these are huge business opportunities. These are multi-billion, hundreds of billions, in some cases, trillion-dollar industries. And the recognition that actually bringing carbon down is one of the best business opportunities you can go after. You see that in the broader numbers. You see that from 2024, the same is going to happen in 2025. Over $2 trillion was invested globally in clean energy technologies. And that's primarily solar, EV, storage, wind, but then you also have geothermal and grid technologies. So fossil fuels has never had $2 trillion invested in a single year. So this is now starting to lap almost double what's being invested in fossil fuels annually. That is the biggest difference I've seen in 2 decades is the amount of dollars flowing into this. Because what that means, it's not niche. I mean, it's so mainstream in a way that I think is hard for, unless you probably sit in, let's say, China, because China is now so far ahead of everyone else in terms of these industries. If you sit here in the States, you really have no idea that this is happening globally. You hear about the one big beautiful bill, you hear about things being pulled back, incentives going away. And, we're so American centric here in our outlook. We think like, everything starts and ends at our borders, that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that no, these are actually trends that have really left the building, and there's no going back.
Are there any areas outside of China and outside the US that are also following this trend as strong?
Well, two things I think are interesting. So, of course, Europe, right? Europe, even 2024, the investments in clean energy technologies surpassed the US. It will definitely do so again this year. And that's driven, as I'm sure you know better than me, is driven by geopolitics as much as anything else, right? People no longer want to be dependent on Russia for natural gas. You don't really drill for oil in Europe, so you have to think, well, how does Europe become self-reliant? Renewables is that opportunity, right? So you see that in Europe, of course. What's fascinating, though, is there's a new geography emerging where a lot of clean energy projects have been announced, not yet financed, but $1.6 trillion of projects have been announced in countries closer to the equator. It's like this, right? Because there's so much sun, right? There's so much. So Morocco, Egypt, you see it in parts of Brazil, in Southeast Asia, where there's this band, this ring around the center, the middle of the earth, where clean energy is starting to flow because the economics are so powerful. And one of the things I think that's not fully appreciated about that is historically, industry flows where energy is cheapest. Now, other things too, right? You have to have a stable government and a stable economy, and you have to have confidence that you can operate in a certain geography over the long term and feel like you can make that investment and it's not at risk. But assume that there is stability. The geography of energy is shifting, and that has profound implications that I think we're not fully aware of just yet.
That's super interesting. So do you think there's going to be this kind of climate ring where all of these countries that fall along or kind of nearby the equator will really be able to tap into this opportunity? That could be an interesting
Well,
dynamic.
well, it's a fascinating thing because that's also the area that's at the most risk of climate disruption, where temperatures are rising. Well, not necessarily rising the fastest. Of course, they're rising fastest at the Arctic poles as well. But there is that dynamic too of the concern about climate disruption for societies, for economies, but in that same band though around the equator. So how that all plays out, I think is going to be fascinating to watch because I think what happens in those areas is going to have absolutely there's no question it's going to have a profound impact on the rest of the world. If you get disruption and therefore you get massive migration flows, right? We haven't so this is now again. You're talking to me. I'm here in South Carolina. Yeah, I think about our border with Mexico. Like we haven't seen anything yet. If the climate migration actually unfolds right as we move into this century and we don't get a handle on it. Yet at the same time, you know, the risk opportunities they're just so almost extreme. They're like these outlier opportunities. So I think it's you can't predict what that future is going to be, but the potential for some really interesting um, diversification, let's say, of where clean energy is being produced and what that means for the global economy. I honestly think it's pretty exciting.
It sounds super exciting, just the way you're talking about it and how you're tapping into all of these different areas that this kind of innovation will touch into. I want to talk about the work that you do around this. So outside of your company, you also do some media, The Lazy Environmentalist and Super Cool. So you've kind of done this journey of talking about these things and writing about these things. How do the how does your messaging strategy change or develop when you talk to these people or when you discuss these kinds of issues?
The through line for me, so for 2 decades, yes, I've been a communicator and kind of moved in and out of starting companies to, I suppose you could say, talking about companies from a media point of view. But 2 decades ago, I did start this company called The Lazy Environmentalist, and it was a bit of an accidental brand. It came out of my own rather, reprehensible environmental personal behaviors. I'm a terrible recycler. Just I was, as someone pointed out, I was always in the shower. They're like, how can you call yourself an environmentalist and still act this way? And so I wrote about my personal, faults and poor habits, and that actually became this TV show, radio show, The Lazy Environmentalist, because I felt like, there's probably a couple 100 million Americans who feel like I do and would do it if it were easy, but do it being lived more sustainably. So in the beginning of my career, I talked more from a consumer kind of personal sustainability journey. The idea always has been, though, how can I identify solutions to help a consumer or an individual become more sustainable in their lifestyles in a way they're actually going to want to do it, right? In ways that it's not about sacrifice, it's not about suffering, it's not about inconvenience, because if it is those things, very few people are going to stick with it. I mean, that was really just the recognition of reality. And we brought some humor to it, right? Where it didn't have to be so serious all the time. And just because climate is this incredibly serious, maybe like lethally, mortally serious subject, doesn't mean that you have to talk about it in life and death stakes all the time if you're trying to move people to shift their behavior. And so that's kind of how I got started in that conversation. It was a lot of fun. We made a reality TV show in Los Angeles with this guy, Dave Metzler, who had created the original Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, which was a very popular show, going back a couple of decades. It was a lot of fun. Today, I have a new media company called Super Cool. So that's podcast, newsletter, YouTube, events we're starting to launch. It's a business lens. It's the same concept, but it's a business lens. And what excites me are the hundreds, if not thousands, of climate tech startups that over the last decade have advanced from the lab through pilots to commercial scale, where now their technologies are actually taking root in the real world, where they help their customers usually either cut emissions, either save money or make money, and also probably do right by the customer as well, actually create a better customer experience. I mentioned the trillions of dollars flowing into these technologies, and you have 15,000 cities around the world with climate action plans, turning at least portions of their cities into living laboratories for some really interesting change. And so we're living in this moment today that I feel is underappreciated in that this is no longer about will this one day happen? Will we have EVs? Will we have solar? Will we have these technologies? We have all this other invisible stuff that we can't even see that, reduces how often the HVAC runs or how much energy it takes to heat and cool our buildings, without us having to even do anything. It's just, AI. Like, will this stuff be here? It's here. And so Super Cool tells those stories. The through line is, for me, the filter always is, when I'm trying to decide what are we going to cover, what are we going to write about, talk about, who we're going to interview, does the solution exist in the world in that it's commercially available? Someone in that industry, if they hear the conversation, they want it, they can get it. Does it cut carbon? Does it increase profitability? Is the company growing it, actually growing revenue? And like I said, there's usually this co-benefit of quality of life or standards of living. Something's usually raised in the process as well, meaning we're moving toward a future, I fundamentally believe, where we're cutting carbon and life is getting better in the process. It's not about sacrifice. It's not about solving climate change so we don't die. It's actually about solving climate change so we enhance our civilization and move toward a future that we're actually going to be excited about.
Well, it's amazing, and it definitely rings true about what you say. And I think the name, like the lazy environmentalist, it's so accurate because you said there are a bunch of Americans that must feel that way. And I wanted to interrupt you and say, and one English guy. So it's definitely something. It's definitely something that people can relate to, and to kind of remove the burden from it as well, because people don't want to be interrupted, and people don't want to feel like they're being like told off for what they are or aren't doing. But I do want to stay on one of the points that you mentioned about technology, because tech is a lot of what I do and a lot of what I report on. So I want to know from you about some of the most exciting technologies that you see emerging from this space that may shape this conversation in the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, we just had this conversation. It was really interesting with some executives from Amazon who came on our show. And Amazon, what's interesting about Amazon is they're the largest renewable energy developer that's not a utility in the world, right? They've just, like, the scale of what they do. They have 30,000 electric vehicle vans that are on the streets. I mean, it's just this massive, massive scale. And we were having this conversation about AI, and they were talking about, so they're talking about, we see these use cases for how AI actually makes us more efficient in warehouses and how we actually do these really interesting things that cut carbon, get products out to the consumer faster at the same time. And I was digesting that and I was thinking, okay, well, what have I seen? And so, to your question, James, I've seen on our show companies like Zoom, Z-U-M. It's founded by this woman, Ritu Narayan, who is Silicon Valley, spent years at eBay as a technology product manager, had 4 kids, moving through the education system in America. And one of the biggest unknown challenges in our American education system, you don't know unless you're a parent and you've experienced the pain, is that school buses in America today they're antiquated. The whole system's antiquated. My kids are having the same experience on a school bus. I've got some elementary school, middle school age kids, as their great grandparents had. right? The school bus hasn't changed, and that's crazy, right? In the 21st century, that like you got this yellow bus goes around, picks everybody up, but once it leaves the depot for the school to go pick up the kids, the transportation director for a school district doesn't know where the bus is. The parents don't know where the bus is. Nobody knows where the bus is. Like, how is that even possible? So Ritu and her team, basically what they do is they go into school districts. They started rolling out about 6 years ago, I want to say in 2019. It's gone so well that they're now in 4,000 schools across America. And what they do is they go into these major school districts, starting with like Oakland in California. And they said, look, we'll take over the buses. We're going to put some technology on them. Of course, we're going to track them. But we're also going to build an app where if a child is sick and not going to school that day, a mom or dad can open the app and be like, hey, Timmy's not going to school. Bus reroutes, right? Doesn't have to just sit there waiting for a kid who's actually not coming out of the house. Then we're going to use some AI, and we're going to optimize the bus routes, and we're going to make sure that kids get to school on time, because that's the crazy thing in America. You have all these kids in public schools who literally aren't getting to school on time by doing the right thing and getting on the bus. They're like the delays are crazy. And you read these articles sometimes about New York City and the public schools, but it's just not covered in a mainstream way. But every parent knows. And then if you're waiting for your kids to come home, you don't know what time they're actually going to get dropped off. And if you're a working parent, it's very hard to coordinate. So she starts Zoom. They use AI to then optimize the route so kids get to school on time and kids get home on time. And then they go to so this starting with Oakland, they went to the transportation director and said, look, now we're in a position to electrify all the school buses. And the reason why we can do that is because while you have 136 buses, we've optimized your system. You only need 74. So we're going to go buy 74 electric school buses and work with the utility to get all the energy here. We're going to manage the whole thing. And Oakland became the first school district, major school district in America to run on 100% electric school buses. Now Zoom is everywhere from Los Angeles to Richmond, Virginia, Boston, Nashville. I mean, they're all over our country because they've really solved something through one, just being incredible operators, using AI in a very smart way, and pulling together this whole technology suite in a very intelligent way to really modernize and fix a broken system.
I love those kinds of stories so much because it encompasses so many elements, right? So it's the optimizing of the AI, it's the getting the kid to school, it's the helping the working parents and families, and it's saving the environment because the vehicles become more efficient. So for me, the example you just gave is is a great one because it really highlights so many of the different things that can be achieved in technology like that. For some of the people that are listening or reading, not reading, watching this now, what are some of the tangible things that they can do to make a difference? Whether that's changing their everyday behaviors or searching for a technology or a company that does something a bit differently. What are some of the ways that people can get involved in their day to day?
I think one of the biggest opportunities is to not so much, I mean, we could talk about electrification, we could talk about all these cool new things that are available, that we're tracking in terms of electric induction stoves that have batteries in them. So if the power goes off, you can actually still cook. And there's a company called Copper that's going to come on the show soon. I mean, there's tons of really interesting electrification appliances, and maybe people want to do that, maybe they don't. And you could talk all day about, really cool gadgety stuff that's happening. What I think tends to go un discussed less, I suppose I would say, is that there's more and more opportunity for people to either bank with institutions that don't fund fossil fuels. Most most banks, most global banks, and as Trump came into power too, like it's actually moving what I would argue in the wrong direction. Most global banks fund fossil fuel projects and are continuing to do so. And your money's sitting in a savings account, right, or a checking account, and it's actually being used to fund things that you may not want. So there are banks, there are other financial institutions where you can park your cash, earn a good interest rate. Here in America, we have Climate First Bank. I think people should, that's a very easy switch. And once you do it, then you're actually funding solar and things more aligned with your values. And the money's working for you. You're going to put it somewhere, right? So why not actually just make that switch? Along those lines, I've seen a company here I believe it's called Climatize, which is also just democratizing the opportunity for individuals to invest into renewable energy projects and make a strong market rate return. Um, and so the democratization and accessibility of ways to actually use your money um, toward your values and earn a return, I think are much stronger than they've ever been. And I'd encourage people to think about that.
All right, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to try and adopt some of those myself, see what I can do from this end. We're approaching the end of the time, unfortunately. We only have so much time that we can discuss these things, but I do want to end in a lightning round. I want to ask you some quick fire questions, and I want simple one sentence answers to them, hopefully, without getting too kind of away with it. But I want to hit you with a few more questions just before we say goodbye. Number one, what's one climate myth that you wish would disappear overnight?
That solving climate change means sacrifice.
What's your favorite underrated sustainable product?
Um, my organic coffee.
One book, podcast, or film that changed the way that you see the world in one sentence.
The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway.
What's harder, building the tech or changing people's behavior?
Changing people's behavior.
Finally, one climate statistic that blows your mind.
The $2.2 trillion that will be invested globally in clean energy technologies in 2025.
Wow, amazing. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time today to chat. I've been absorbing everything you've been saying, and you're painting a picture of a very exciting future. Final question. What is the best way for people listening or watching this to reach, to get in touch with you or to follow you?
You can find all of our work about Supercool and our other projects at getsuper.cool. I am on LinkedIn more than other social channels, so if anyone wants to find me there, that would be great.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to put some links as well at the bottom, just some websites, and I'll make it very easy for people to connect with you. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing your insights.
Thank you, James. Really enjoyed it.